you know, when you learn a little bit more about the conspiracy too, then like maybe this is what will convert people back to Yaupon and replace coffee.
Welcome to Galveston Unscripted. In this episode today, I sit down with Sepp Haukebo, a scientist who has worked on fisheries and ecology projects around the United States and the Caribbean. In this episode, Sepp and I sit down and discuss Yaupon Holly, one of the United States' only native caffeinated plants that can be found right here on Galveston Island. Now, for some context, Sepp and I met for coffee and tea a few weeks ago, and we sat down and started discussing Yaupon Holly. And Sepp, as a Yaupon harvester and tea drinker, started to describe to me some of the conspiracy behind Yaupon, and I found it fascinating. And I began wondering how I could tie Yaupon back to the history of Galveston Island. Well, as luck would have it, Sepp let me borrow a book, and of course he dog-eared a few pages that specifically discussed Galveston and the Texas area. Alvar Nunez Cabeza de Vaca shipwrecked along the Texas coast in 1528, possibly on Galveston Island. And some of the first written accounts of Yaupon being drank by the natives in this area was from Alvar Nunez Cabeza de Vaca in his writings later on in his life. And of course, that ties the history of Yaupon being drank by the natives in this area back to Texas history. So I invited Sepp to join me in the studio to discuss a little bit of the history on Yaupon Holly and how it can be harvested here on Galveston Island, safely and responsibly, of course. I've linked a few resources in the description of this episode on how to safely identify and harvest Yaupon for yourself, or you could even just purchase it from some of the vendors that are selling it in our area. Either way, this is an absolutely fascinating discussion on Yaupon here in Galveston and across the southeast of the United States. Without further ado, let's hop right into this episode discussing a little bit of the history behind Yaupon with Sepp Haukebo. Welcome to Galveston Unscripted.
But yeah, it looks great in here, and the pictures set a good tone. I didn't know you were a photographer. These are great.
Well, amateur, heavy
yeah.
amateur.
Still counts.
But the night ones actually, so that one over there and that one, the bottom one over there, I started like late last year. I started going live on TikTok.
Okay.
Just randomly, I saw like live was getting big on TikTok. I was like, oh, I'm gonna go live, walk around Galveston at night, and take night photography shots. So a lot of these were like in the downtown area and then my neighborhood. So I'd just walk around.
Cool.
And it was so crazy to see like 1,200 people from around the country watching a live TikTok of me walking around Galveston.
Yeah, wow.
You know, it's so crazy. But then I would post on my Instagram and it would actually drive traffic to my Instagram. I was like, oh, I see. This is great. So you're capturing an audience and able to bring them over to a different platform. So
Nice.
That's kind of what I did. And then whenever we put those sound panels up, which are sound panels back here, by the way.
Okay.
I printed out these photos. I'm like, all right, we're going to put these over those. So I wanted to kind of cover it up a little bit.
Cool.
Yeah, man.
Very cool. Have you had any like high school students in here or anything? Like the Ball High?
No.
Just the space is like inspirational. Like,
Is
I
it?
think-
Well,
I think-
thanks, man.
Yeah,
I
I think
appreciate
kids
that.
seeing this would be like, all right, I could do this, you know?
Well, that means a lot, man.
Yeah.
That means a lot. It really
Yeah.
does. Because, I mean, this has been like a dream come true, honestly.
Yeah.
And
Labor of love, right?
Yeah, for sure. I get to talk about my hometown and kind of make something out of a small place,
Yeah.
out of a small thing,
Yeah,
you
yeah.
know, and really dive deep into it. So,
Neat.
yeah, man.
Very cool.
Well, Sepp, thanks for coming in today, man. I appreciate it.
Yeah, I'm excited
Yeah.
about this.
Yeah, for sure, man. Well, if you want, you can get more comfortable and
Yeah.
you know, whatever. You can lean back a little bit if you want to. But first, you have the most interesting name I have ever heard.
All
I
right.
can never say your last name, by the way.
That's all right. Haukebo.
Haukebo.
Yeah.
And it's Sepp.
Yep.
I've
that's
never
it.
met another Sepp in my life.
Yeah, I've only known of one other one.
Oh, really?
Yeah. Friend of my family back from Germany. So Sepp is German for Joseph.
Oh, really?
My
Okay.
dad, his dad served in the military after World War II. My dad was born over there. His name was Joseph. And so when I came around, they said, well, we're going to name him Sepp. So Giuseppe's like the Italian version. And then Haukebo is Norwegian. That's more like the
gotcha.
family ancestry there.
Gotcha.
Yeah.
Sweet, man.
Yeah. When I was a kid, I hated it. You know, you're like, this is brutal. None of my teachers can pronounce anything. I got the weird name in class. And then eventually, you know, you grow into it and you appreciate the weirdness.
Yeah, for sure.
Yeah.
Well, I'll never forget, like, when I went to A&M Galveston, you were one of the scholarship advisors. And every time your email would come across, I would be like, I don't know. I cannot say.
Yeah.
We'd be like, Habuko? We'd be like, as a group, we'd be like, is it Habuko? I don't know. We can't say it. We can't read, of course. We're at AM. Who
Yeah.
knows?
Yeah, and my cousin, when he was real little, a teacher was kind of stumbling, and he was in first grade, and she said, "What is your last name?" And he said, "Sound it out." 'Cause that's what teachers are always telling the kids, right? So she said, "Haukebo." He said, "Good job."
That's perfect.
Yeah, it looks scary, but once you get into it, it ain't bad.
Yeah. Well, before we get into the topic of conversation today, which is Yaupon, I can never really pronounce that either.
You got it.
Just like your last name. Could you tell us a little bit about your background?
Yeah.
Where you come from and how you got to the point you're in now?
Yeah, great question. So I grew up in northern New Mexico, just with a love for the outdoors. You know, we were ice fishing, we were skiing, cross-country skiing, hiking, fishing, you name it. But I always loved the ocean. Anytime we traveled, we'd try and, just backpack. And my family was trying to do things on a budget. We'd go to a little town in Mexico. And I said, this is what I want to do when I grow up. I want to be near the ocean. I want to study the ocean. So I found out from some high school teachers that Texas A&M has a branch in Galveston, Texas A&M Galveston, that's world renowned for marine biology, oceanography, marine fisheries. So naturally, made the hop down here. Didn't even look at East Coast or West Coast. It didn't really matter because there was a great place right here in the Gulf. So I went through my undergrad and master's there, had a lot of really fun, summer jobs, internship opportunities. And then my degree took me to Washington, D.C. to work on the science and policy kind of interface. And then eventually made it back to the Gulf and now work on conservation in the Gulf of Mexico and Caribbean Basin, especially on the marine fisheries side.
Awesome, man. That's so cool.
Yeah, it's been a journey.
Yeah. So you're actually doing something with your degree.
Yes. Yeah. Well, and like they say, it's a license to drive, right? Like you prove that you can finish things. And there's a lot of stuff I do not remember. I mean, just doing research for this podcast, I had to go back through some of the history on taxonomy and scientific names. And you're like, wow, it was, flashback 20 years ago when you're learning about this in class and you're thinking, oh, scientific names are so boring, but then you start to learn how interesting they are as you get a little bit older, and like we'll get into in a little bit, the conspiracy that can come with some of that scientific naming.
Yeah, and that's fascinating. For some context, about a month and a half ago, maybe, we sat down, had some coffee, and you gave me this book, Black Drink, and you dog-eared a few pages in here that specifically talk about the Galveston area in Texas. But going through this book, you start learning about this plant that grows native in this area in the southeastern United States and Texas, and that is the only only caffeinated plant in North America.
Native to North America.
Native to North America, yeah.
Absolutely.
And evidently, you were mentioning to me that there was a conspiracy behind why it's named what it is today. The scientific name is what it is today. So I want to get into that and like talk about some of the benefits behind this thing and how it's kind of making a resurgence now. Yeah,
absolutely. Today we'll be talking a little bit about Yaupon, or Yaupon Holly, as a lot of folks know it. Ilex vomitoria is the scientific name. And I got to make a note right up front. I'm not a botanist. I also am not a nutritionist, and I can't tell you, this is what looks good. Go ahead and brew it or eat it. But Yaupon itself is, the Yaupon berries are toxic, but the leaves, you can make a terrific tea out of it, and they are not emetic, or the scientific word for makes you vomit. But as you can tell, there is, in that scientific name, Ilex vomitoria, there's some history there. So I figured maybe I'd start off with some fun facts.
Yeah, let's do it.
We can get to the really interesting part.
Let's do it. For sure.
The conspiracy behind the scientific name. Like you said, this is one of North America's most caffeinated native plants. Depending on how you brew it, it's a little bit less caffeinated than coffee. So it's similar to like yerba mate, which is having its moment right now as well. Yerba mate is known as Ilex paraguariensis. So it's a cousin. Yaupon actually means little tree in, I had to look this up, but it's a Catawban language, which are natives based around the Appalachian Plateau.
Okay.
But like the Cherokee peoples called it their beloved tree. When Spanish colonials were visiting Florida, they called it té de indio, the Indian tea. It was also really commonly known as casina. And for a while in England, it was called South Sea tea.
South Sea
kind
tea.
of a rebranding, right? Which would be kind of a cool, like, Gulf of Mexico brand.
Yeah, it really would be. South Sea tea. I like that.
Yeah. Good ring. And then for a little while, it even had a moment in Paris, and it was called Appalachian in like Parisian cafes. So all good names, right?
Yeah. How foreign and exotic.
Yeah,
Paris,
I know, right?
Right?
And the funny thing is, once you identify it and you start looking around, you may even see it in your backyard. You'll see it all over Galveston. You'll see it all over Central and Southeast Texas. It grows from the Carolinas down to Florida, and then from Florida all the way to Central Texas.
Yeah.
And you'll just be blown away that here's this incredible tea that's growing, right in front of you. And I talked to some folks that growing up, maybe they were in Boy Scouts or whatever it was, they were always told by their parents, that is toxic, that will make you vomit. The berries, of course, but everybody also thought the teas were dangerous. So yeah, there's a lot of history there. One of the things that made it such a great tea is that it doesn't have tannins, and tannins are what make tea a little bit bitter.
Yeah.
So I've actually, when I've been brewing it, I'll leave it and forget about it. 20 minutes later, I'll come back. That would ruin any other kind of green or black tea, and it's still just as good. It also has a really great flavor when you make iced tea out of it. That's actually my favorite way. It has like a little bit of a cola flavor. So like your traditional Southern black iced tea with little bit of cola added in. It, like that cola flavor just is incredible.
I think my mouth is watering now.
Yeah, and we brought some for you to try today too.
Dude,
so,
I'm excited.
Yeah,
I can't wait to try it.
Yeah, absolutely. Another fun fact, it's packed with theobromine, which is a stimulant that's naturally found in chocolate. So think about that buzz you kind of get from having a nice dark chocolate bar. Theobromine is also a slight aphrodisiac, so don't drink too much of this in the morning. Wait till the evenings. It's a mood booster, and it boosts energy levels.
Yeah.
So you can really see why it was revered by so many of the native cultures around the North America. Yeah, a couple ways to prepare it. Green is really good. You can kind of dry it and then just make a green tea. But also, I love to pick some, sustainably around here on the island. Roast it at about 400 degrees in the oven for like 8 minutes. Your whole house will just start to smell incredible.
Oh, wow.
You go too long though, and it will char, and you'll get, the wife will be telling you, what are you burning?
Yeah, what are you burning in here?
in here? But it's kind of like coffee. You could do a light roast, a dark roast. That changes the flavor. That changes the level of caffeine. So it's really fun to play around with, and it's not like you're having to source coffee beans from another country and potentially have to pay for all that. It's just a really fun thing to experiment with.
That's crazy. You can literally grow it in your backyard.
Yeah, absolutely.
It blows my mind.
Yeah, and if you're gonna forage it, I would encourage folks to check out. There's a great website called Foraging Texas. That guy actually does clinics or workshops all over the state, and this is one of the first places I learned about it. But he'll tell you, like don't forage on the side of a highway. You've got all sorts of pollutants in the air.
Oh,
you don't want to trespass. You want to try and harvest from areas where there hasn't been like a spill or a toxic dump. You always want to be careful, know the rules and regulations if you're in a city park or a state park or a national park. But other than that, you will see it everywhere.
Yeah.
And there's also some commercially available products around Texas too.
So, and the Yaupon is a pretty robust plant, right? It'll survive, in this area naturally, natively through thick and thin, basically.
Yeah,
so
absolutely.
It will grow on the side of a highway or like in an area where there have been pollutants. Right?
Yeah. You'll find it almost everywhere. I was looking around some places you can get it in Galveston. Galveston Tree Conservancy has some Yaupon trees. I'm sure several of the garden
Yeah.
purveyors around here also sell it. Yeah, and like you go to any ranch and you're going to see it somewhere.
Yeah.
It's a pretty incredible tree. It's I won't say it's invasive because it's native, but it'll force a lot of other things kind of off the property, and it will take over, which is cool because there you have a commercial opportunity.
Yeah.
If you want to get rid of some of it.
That's right. That's right. So the natives used to, of course, drink it just like we are today, basically, just on its own. But they used to mix it with other things as well, right? I mean, and the Spanish did as well when they arrived in the Floridas and things like that. They would mix it with chocolate and other things like that.
Yep, absolutely. So the natives used it in just kind of everyday drink, but also they would use it a lot in spiritual rituals. And this is one of the areas or one of the reasons that people believe it was named Ilex vomitoria is because they would consume massive amounts of it, boiling hot as they could possibly stand it, and then they would throw up afterwards. And the idea was this would really clear their mind. In a lot of history that I read, like in Florida, for instance, some of the tribes would drink it to really get that clarity. And like after you have a cup of this, you're thinking theobromine, caffeine, your mind is super sharp. And so they would leave some of their biggest decisions to these moments when their mind was really clear. Now, if you drink this on its own, if you drink gallons and gallons, it might make you throw up. But on its own, it's not going to make you throw up. So some people were thinking that the reason these natives would throw up afterwards is the quantities, or that they'd mix it with something, to your point. And there's no real strong history on what they would mix it with. But like the Karankwans, for instance, around here, that have been known, the history here around Galveston Island, the Karankwans would frequently drink this casina, this Yaupon. And you also, when you start digging into the history, you see that it was traded throughout North America. It was traded with tribes Midwest, Southwest, really far outside of its actual range, because think about how far coffee has made it.
Right.
Everybody in the world has experienced coffee in one way or another. And so think about before coffee, this was like this was the thing, and was traded all over North America.
It's a valuable commodity to trade with the areas where it doesn't grow naturally, right?
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Yep. And there's some really interesting, like there's a few images in this book. You start digging around on websites, there's some ceremonial shells that they would actually drink it out of. And I'm thinking, all right, we need a shop in Galveston that has some shells that you can drink coffee tea out of, and you can buy Yaupon, right there.
Oh, that'd be
make
great.
It yourself at
That'd
home.
be great.
Oh man, let's get it started.
Little thermos shell. Okay,
that's
let's do it. Let's do it. Well, I was reading, I think it was in this book, the Atakapan tribe that was around this area, around where the Karankwar were as well. They would drink during their spiritual rituals, their cleansing rituals, over 3 days. They would fast and drink around, and this is the Spanish and French accounts, but they would drink around 6 gallons of that throughout the day to cleanse themselves.
Yeah.
It just blows my mind,
Well, and now, there's these trends around fasting, and there's a lot more research that's telling us all the health benefits of fasting, especially fasting safely. And so you think about, these are not discoveries we're making now. These are things that Native Americans have known for a long time.
Yeah, tens of thousands of years, really. I mean,
yeah, absolutely.
It's crazy.
And there's a handful of accounts where, not necessarily businesses, but where purveyors of Yaupon in the 1800s would say, we've discovered this new tea, and it's been used. I think it's been dated back to the, almost 1000 AD.
Oh my gosh.
When was like the first instance, or that's what they dated back based on shells that were used for drinking, and there was residuals of Yaupon.
Oh, okay. So that's not as far back as I was thinking originally. Yeah.
I'm sure it goes back further. That's with science and history, they have to have some sort of proof somewhere.
Right. That's true.
So I'm sure it goes back even further than that.
Well, speaking of proof, right, or firsthand accounts, right? One of the first written accounts of Yaupon being used and drank here was from Cabeza de Vaca, who shipwrecked somewhere along the Texas coast, probably Galveston, and in 1542, when he went back to Spain, he wrote down all of his accounts that when he spent 9 years here roaming the American Southwest, essentially, and that was one of the first accounts of Yaupon being drank.
Yeah,
here in North
absolutely.
America. So
Pretty interesting. I think there was a Spanish priest also that said, the men here, I think it was referring to Florida, but the men here have to drink this every day.
Yeah.
It's like their coffee.
Yeah.
He didn't say that because coffee wasn't as big, but if a day without Yaupon or Casina, as he said, was a day wasted.
yeah, right. It's like coffee with me, or
Yeah.
caffeine
Oh, yeah.
in general. So.
Yeah, absolutely.
I'm ready to be converted to Yaupon, though. I am.
It's fun. It really is. And when you learn a little bit more about the conspiracy too, then like maybe this is what will convert people back to Yaupon and replace coffee.
Sweet. I love conspiracy theories and proven conspiracies as well.
Absolutely. Well, you ready to dive in?
Let's do it.
Okay.
Let's dive into it.
All right. So we've got the scientific name Ilex vomitoria. As I said, Yaupon was drank a lot by natives, and then the settlers really started to catch on, and they loved it here in North America. And shortly before the American Revolution, think like Boston Tea Party, the price of Asian tea that was coming through England was through the roof. And most of Europe was really encapsulated by this Asian tea trend. But all of a sudden, they found that there was this other option in North America. And so a lot of Americans were, or at that time, settlers in the U.S. were really drinking a fair amount of this. You have the American Revolution. Almost all trade from England slows down or stops, especially around tea. And so American purveyors start to sell it locally, and a fair amount of American merchants start to sell it in Europe. And it starts to catch on. Like I said, it caught on in Paris, throughout France. It's caught on in Spain. It's caught on throughout Britain or Great Britain. So there was a couple of instances in England where they actually had like a public relations where they said, you're not English if you drink other teas. Only if you're English, only drink English teas.
Yeah.
Right. But then you also had around the Carolinas, I think shortly after the American Revolution, you had this German botanist that tasted Yaupon and said, this is a great alternative to Asian teas. And he said, I can see how this would be a threat to the British East India Company, which commanded most of the tea trade at that time. Well, fast forward about 30 years, and in 1789, the famed botanist and the first superintendent of the Royal Botanical Gardens in England, who was appointed by King George III, he actually gives Yaupon the controversial scientific name of Ilex vomitoria. And you can imagine somebody that hears about that. Nobody wants to drink that.
No.
Right?
It has vomit in the name. It's
Yeah,
like, no, thank you.
And when as soon as you Google Yaupon, that's the first thing that pops up. And that's what a lot of the more recent merchants have had to deal with. So there's this stigma. Well, another really interesting note is about 30 years before that, Carl Linnaeus, who's like now known as the father of taxonomy, right? In 1753, he gave Yaupon the scientific name Ilex cassine, as everybody in Europe had known it as Cassina. And Linnaeus actually thought that Yaupon and this newly discovered Yaupon Holly, which is also found in like the same area throughout the U.S., were the same species. So then we get back again to 1789 when this botanist for King George III says, oh, we've got two plants that are different species. I need to rename this. I'm going to go ahead and rename this tea, the Yaupon tea and the plant, Ilex vomitoria. And so the conspiracy theory is that he actually did that to disrupt the tea industry, right?
Wow.
Disrupt this trade that was starting out of North America. A lot of people try and forgive him and say, there was a lot of historical accounts where drinking Yaupon would make you vomit. But I think there's a lot of evidence for the conspiracy.
I mean,
here.
he was kind of under the thumb of the king as well, right? And That makes a lot of sense to hurt the American economy at that point.
Oh yeah, absolutely. And shortly after that, you see declines across Europe. They don't really, the popularity really tanked. Now, I'd say the commercial popularity in the U.S. also tanked, but there were a lot of course, native people and then people throughout the Southeast that continued to drink it. You find some accounts from like the Civil War when British tea and tea from Southeast Asia was really hard to find, so they would drink more of the local Yaupon tea.
That makes so much sense. That makes so much sense because during the Civil War, you could just kind of walk out in the woods wherever you're camping and go find that Yaupon and brew it up for your boys out there.
Absolutely, find what's available to you.
You'd be the most popular guy. You know how to source Yaupon and go get it.
Yeah, no doubt. Well, and you've got caffeine, you got theobromine.
Yeah.
Like, it's not like you're forcing this stuff down. It's really, it's really good tea. So fast forward to kind of the early 1940s, 1950s, and it starts to make a little bit of a resurgence in the U.S. The USDA even did some research into could this be a commercially viable species. And then here in Texas, I first saw it at a farmer's market in early 2000s. It was probably like 2006, 2007. A company that is still around. And I brought a little bag of it today called Lost Pines Yaupon tea. Phenomenal tea. They tell you how to make it. They've got all sorts of varieties: green, light roasted, dark roasted. There's another company in Texas called Cat Springs Yaupon.
I saw something about them yesterday. Really fascinating what they're doing. Yeah.
Yeah, absolutely. And so I think there's a handful of companies here in Texas that are doing a good job of making great Yaupon, roasting great Yaupon, but also honoring that the tradition, the native traditions, right? And not trying to rebrand it or take over, really recognizing that this came from some of the first peoples in the Southeast. You've got there's a huge group out of Florida called Yaupon Brothers. They do a really good job of telling the history as well. And then there's all these really new uses for it. Like you see Yaupon matcha. There's a Yaupon soda, Yaupon kombucha. There's even a Yaupon gin.
Oh, really?
There's a Texas distiller just outside of Austin named Treaty Oak.
I'm about to get online and see if I can order something.
Yeah,
or
absolutely.
go up there, make a drive up there.
Yep, and it's kind of a dark gin, but it's supposed to be great. So there's certainly this economy that's starting to boom right now around Yaupon, this resurgence. Again, it's great. It's great tasting, but you learn all this history.
Yeah.
It's like, all right, you're literally drinking history.
Yeah. I wonder if we would appreciate it as much if the name, would we appreciate it as much today if that name wouldn't have been changed, or would we have kind of taken it for granted if a Yaupon industry would have taken off in the late 1700s?
Yeah, it's a great question. I imagine it wouldn't be having the resurgence, especially nowadays where people like a story behind what they're eating and drinking. But we also wouldn't have seen as big a drop off in the drinking in the 1700s. I think it would have continued to thrive, and now there are even some really incredible programs I've seen throughout like Southeast U.S. Where they're repatriating some historically black farms, working with farmers to institute Yaupon as one of the key crops, and catch on to this or keep up with this boom in Yaupon.
Right? I mean, it could, maybe not disrupt the billions of dollar tea industry, but it definitely could make a dent here in the U.S. for sure.
Yeah, no doubt. And I think, even foragers and small scale, you could start a small business out of this pretty easily. There's no place on the island to get it right now. I even stopped in at Freckleberry this morning, and they're hoping to eventually get some. Maybe this is the push to finally source some. This Lost Pines Yaupon Tea Group, they actually will go in and clear some Yaupon in order to make room for other native species. And one of their things is the Houston toad, which is endangered and is their logo. They actually go into the habitats to pull out Yaupon and encourage those other native species that are much more benevolent to the Houston toad.
Is it? Tell me about the Houston toad. I don't know
I
anything
don't know
about
much
it.
more.
Okay.
I don't know much more beyond that. Like they've got some really cool stories on their website too.
Okay.
And the fact that again that it's kind of a dual purpose, right?
Yeah.
It's not just commercial selling of this. They're also having an environmental impact and trying to regrow some of these Houston toad habitats.
That's so cool. That is awesome.
Yeah,
it's amazing.
Again, everything, if it's got a story, you're much more likely to eat or drink it.
That's right. That's right. That's like the farmer's market, the meat. It's like you tell the story behind the animal there and
that's right.
whatever before you buy the meat. It's
yeah,
really
one
funny,
day we will have
but it's
every
the same.
Yaupon tea will have a name, and you'll hear
Yeah.
the history of every Yaupon leaf.
Yeah, and to kind of bring it back to Galveston, right? It grows naturally here on the island, right? And has for thousands of years.
Yeah, absolutely. One of these days, I got to get you out there, and I'll take you to one of my favorite foraging spots. We'll usually bring the kids out after a rain is nice because it washes some of the cobwebs off or any kind of residuals.
Yeah.
And then we take it home. We usually rinse it off if there's if you see some more cobwebs, but then roast it. My kids haven't grown to love picking or drinking it, but gets them outdoors especially.
But they will definitely remember it. That's for sure.
That's right. It's all
and
about the memories.
they'll know all about Yaupon for sure.
Yeah, absolutely.
Well, let's try this, man. I want to try it out.
All right. Yeah, I brought some in today.
Sweet. I've never had Yaupon, so
This is home roasted. It's a dark roast, I would say. So I've got a little bag of some of the roasted leaves.
oh god, it smells so good. It's funny. It smells like tea.
Yeah, right.
I mean, it's like I don't know what to expect, but
And you can smell you could take a little whiff of the leaves there.
God, it smells so good.
Yeah, so imagine roasting that in your house.
I'm gonna go find some Yaupon today.
Yeah.
roast it when I get home.
It's a great little micro adventure. We've been trying to find as many micro adventures around the island where you don't have to plan 2-3 day weekend. You can go do something in a couple hours.
And this is not sweetened.
Not
this
sweetened
is straight. It's sweet. I
Yeah.
mean, not overwhelmingly sweet, but it has a sweet flavor to
Yeah,
it.
there's no bitterness. And that one I actually forgot about, so I let that one steep a lot longer than I should have, but it's still...
So this would be more of like the dark
Yep,
roast,
that's
right?
more of a dark roast. Again...
Show it on camera. I don't know if you could. No, you can't see it. Okay. That is unbelievable. Oh my gosh. Dude, and it grows. This is unbelievable.
It's crazy, right?
Yes.
Yeah. So when I first learned about this, I'd come back from a work trip to the Bahamas, and they drink a lot of bush tea down there. So they're walking down the road. Again, if you didn't want to pay a lot of the import prices, you'd just pick some of your own tea. And I came back to Galveston. I'm thinking we've got to have some bush tea here on the island. And I start looking it up, and right off the bat, Yaupon pops up, and it is. It's one of those. You can pick it, wherever you see it, as long as it's legal.
Oh yeah, right.
I've even tried to kind of slow roast and smoke it. There's some really smoky teas out there. There's like a Russian caravan tea, and then there's a Lapsang Souchong. Are both like really like it smells like you're drinking a campfire. It turns out decent, but I still think black, regular roasted. Iced tea is the best way to have
Yeah, I
this.
can imagine this iced.
Oh, yeah.
God, it'd be so good.
I haven't mixed it with anything. Maybe one day mix it with a little bit of that Yaupon gin. But
Right?
for now, just drinking it in the mornings.
Man, that's great. Dude. Well, thanks so much for coming in and telling us about it. Is there anything else you wanted to cover and talk about? Maybe your work now or some of the fisheries work you've done in the past?
Yeah. Oh boy, that's a whole other episode. Yeah, talking about the history of fisheries in the Gulf of Mexico. That would be a fun one. We were talking about this book, Gulf, that you've got here, and that's a phenomenal book to teach the history of the Gulf, both the natural history as well as the human history throughout the evolution. But yeah, I mean fisheries. Let's set a date and
Yeah,
talk
for sure.
about that on another time.
I would love to. Well, cool. Sepp, thank you so much for coming in and talking about Yaupon. It grows right here in our backyard, has a fascinating history. One of the first written accounts by Europeans was from Cabeza de Vaca, who shipwrecked here along the Texas coast in 1528, which is pretty insane. I mean, to think about how far back that history goes and how it all ties back to Galveston and the Texas coast.
Yeah, absolutely. There's some fascinating history here.
Yeah, man.
Well, appreciate
cool.
it. We
Thanks,
had a great
Sepp.
time today.
Appreciate it, man. Thanks.
All right.
Awesome.
You liked it, huh?
Dude, that was good. Thank you.